we have a Marshallian demand function for x1. What I just showed you is the angle curve. That involved holding prices fixed and varying y. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a different picture. The next picture I'm going to show you is going to hold y fixed and vary p1. So we're going to change the price of the good we're talking about. And we've already talked about this some earlier, but I just used words. So here on the horizontal, on the vertical axis. Oh, crumb. I have a excuse to make here in a moment. Let me come back to it. Here on this axis we have prices. Here on this axis we have quantities of good x1. You might think it's more natural to have x1 on the vertical axis and prices on the horizontal axis. I would be inclined to agree with you. In this case, this thing's symmetric about the 45-degree line, so it doesn't matter. Let me return to the issue of the axes in a moment. Okay, so here we've got what happens to quantities when we vary prices, and we trace out the hyperbola that we talked about earlier. So remember the mathematical form for this demand function. Let me write it down. I'm going to do the axes this way. So if I have P1 here, I have X1 here. What we said earlier is that X1 is equal to alpha over alpha plus beta all times Y divided by P1. So as we vary P1 now, we're going to trace out a hyperbola that looks like this. Okay, so this is that graph. Okay, now, does anyone know anything about Alfred Marshall? He was, yes? Alfred Marshall was a great explorer of economics. He might have had a slide on the Amazon or something too, but I'm not aware of that. He was a great economist. You can tell from the fact that his demand system bears his name, the Marshallian demand system. Maybe his most important contribution to economics, though, was that he wrote the first textbook. So he wrote a textbook called Principles of Economics in the late 19th century, and it was the standard treatment of economics for 50 years at least. And Marshall was a creative. I mean, he was truly a great economist. He wasn't a great mathematician, and he decided when he wrote down demand curves like this, for reasons which I think are inexcusable, he decided instead of doing it this way, which I think is natural, and I think most people do, he decided to put quantities on the horizontal axis and prices on the vertical axis. Okay, so whenever we graph Marshallian demand functions and we vary prices, we tend to get stuck with Marshall's treatment of it. And this is why you should. So if I wrote it this way, those of you who have had sort of intro econ classes will recognize we've got prices on the vertical, quantities on the horizontal. I blame Alfred Marshall for getting it backward. Okay, so in that same intro course, you might have seen demand curves look kind of like that. So they tend to be straight lines in intro classes, and when professors draw these things on the board, they usually carefully avoid making the lines go all the way to the axis because you don't really want to talk about what happens when you get to zero there. So notice when we actually solve this problem for a consumer, we wind up with something that's not a straight line at all. It's a hyperbola. And these kinds of shapes tend to emerge from individual demand problems more than these kinds of things do. We'll talk about linear demand curves at some point too, but not today. Anyway, this hyperbola that you're seeing here that we just derived corresponds to the thing you talked about in Econ or some other intro course perhaps, except the axes are backwards and the line's not straight. That's sort of where we're at. Okay. All right, questions about this thing? Yes?
So just when you trace the angle curve is like how X changes the different Y's in price function. It's really hard to Marshallian demand curve. It's the same income, but how X changes the Y.
That's right. Remind me of your name? Michelle. So Michelle just put it very well. So she said, did I get your name right?
What?
Did I get your name right, Michelle? Okay. So Michelle said the angle curve tells us what happens when we hold prices fixed and change income. That tells us that's the answer to what happens to demand as we vary income. This version of the Marshallian, we'll sometimes call this Marshallian demand curve. This curve tells us what happens to demand when we change the price. Sometimes call this the own price of the good. So we're varying P1 here, and this traces out what we got. And this gives us the demand curves you're used to seeing in a little demand and supply kind of diagram. We are missing one curve, one graph we might have made, because remember the demands we have here depend on three numbers: on income, on the price of good 1, and on the price of good 2. So what would this curve look like if I made this a P2? Yeah. Well, here's the expression we've got. This is the solution. How does x1 vary with P2? Yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. It'll be some. Oh, sorry, did that wrong? I meant this. The axes are backward again. So x1 doesn't depend on P2 at all. So if we had a consumer who was consuming some quantity x1, facing prices P1 and Y, and these things didn't change, but P2 increased, what would be going on for that consumer? Yeah. Yeah, all the adjustments happening on the X2 margin, we might say. So, and in particular, for these preferences again, as price P2 goes up, the quantity of X2 they're going to demand is going to go down at exactly the same rate. So the total share of expenditures on X2 is going to remain constant. And in fact, for P2 for X2 it'll be beta over alpha plus beta. That share doesn't change. So again, for these preferences, demand for X1 doesn't depend on the price of P2 at all. Now that again, so that's true of this example. So for the preferences I've written down, these log preferences, demand for a good only depends on its own price and not income. That is not a general proposition. So in particular, lots of other utility functions will have prices of other goods showing up here, and they need to if there's going to be interesting substitution sort of or complementarities between the goods you have utility defined over. Okay. All right, I think I'm going to stop there if there are no questions. Thank you.